you check the children? Show a little mad sometimes.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes. That is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Long days and pleasant frights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known on this level of the tower as Jaime and Fuego, and if it please you join me here for a bit of palaver on Hail to Stephen King. That's Reezy, and obviously Bienvenidos, and welcome to the horror show. You can just call me Fuego, and I am making my return for another of my weekly worship of El Rey, my favorite author. As y'all can tell if you're just stumbling upon this review by the Tower of Tomes behind me, yes, Sai King is my favorite author, and for over 300 episodes of this program, dating back to 2017, I have been covering my favorite author, the man. And so this week's installment is one that I had been planning for quite a while because I genuinely think that one of the most underrated and just overlooked in a lot of ways adaptations of a Sai King story is celebrating its 25th anniversary. That is Reezy, and we be talking none other than The Night Flier. So this was a short story that, well, it had its initial genesis in a collection called Primeval, New Stories by the Masters of Horror, and that was released in 1988, but it was collected proper for like more of a mass market audience because a lot of those smaller collections are, they're pricey, they're tough to track down, it's incredibly aggravating at the price point that you have to shell out for those. I don't think this is one that had like a bunch of illustrations for it or anything, as you do often see with some of these more collectible editions of, you know, short anthologies and stuff that King has done, but yes, Nightmares and Dreamscapes in September, I believe, September 28th of 1993. That was where this was collected proper in a hardcover form. Just re-listened to it. Still love it. It's one of my... I just love fangers, man! I mean, dating back to... long before we even did the sweet short film here on the horror show that I had the humble, just blessing and honor to be a part of, playing Skinner Sweet. You can see that short here on the horror show if you just do the search for Sweet. You can find our short vampire western that we did. And shout out to Cecil, just for a brief tangent, because he was recently, finally, able to shoot his long in development Freddy Krueger short film entitled Dylan's New Nightmare. Dylan's New Nightmare is actually a fan film continuation of the amazing Wes Craven's New Nightmare. That was when Craven was going meta before meta was even a thing with Scream that he did a few years later. And so the return of Miko Hughes, which is amazing as a grown-up Dylan Porter, very, very fucking cool. And Dave McRae apparently slayed it on set. I was only there for the first couple of days of production, and then unfortunately that work and some other obligations took their precedence, but the energy, the synergy was really just incredible to be a part of for a very brief cameo that I have at the beginning of the film, and then just seeing Cecil's dreams or nightmares coming true. But yeah, so keep an eye out for Dylan's New Nightmare. There are some official photos that were just released this past week, and yeah, very, very exciting in said regard. But the first, well, not the first, because we did a few other shorts and skits and sketches here on the horror show, but yes, vampires have always been one of my favorite things, whether From Dusk Till Dawn, which is one of my absolute favorite, probably my favorite vampire film of all time, although Fright Night comes pretty close, Lost Boys, Near Dark, I mean, anything to do with vampires, I've all too often, 30 Days of Night, I mean, damn, there's so many terrific vampire films out there. But yes, this is one that the short story is really great, and it's great because of the fact that you have the return of a character named Richard Dees, and Richard Dees was originally just a one and done, presumably according to King, in the 1979 novel The Dead Zone. So The Dead Zone obviously being about Johnny Smith, incredibly adapted by David Cronenberg, and then later on they even did the television series that had, what, Anthony Michael Hall, I want to say, from Breakfast Club and from various other stuff. Evil dies tonight! Don't get me started on that shit. But nonetheless, so they did a television series. I'm not sure if Richard Dees showed up in the television series because that is still one of the few things that I have not actually reviewed as far as all of the King coverage. I've covered pretty much every book of his. I've read every book of his, reviewed just about every one, and just about every film and television adaptation. But that is one of the few The Dead Zone, and, oh goodness, the television series that was based on the Colorado Kid. The title of that is eluding me right at the moment. But nonetheless, Richard Dees showed up as a sleazy tabloid reporter for a publication called The Inside View. And so Inside View is essentially what you would see at the grocery store checkout. I don't really see these type of magazines when I head into like a Safeway or even a Target or anything like that. Now it's primarily dominated by the stuff that's always been there, like People magazine and, you know, Time and things of that nature, or excuse me, Life magazine, and, you know, shit like that. But, yeah, so I used to always see things like National Enquirer, or even more so what Inside View is akin to, I would say, the Weekly World News, where you saw craziness like Bat Boy and things of that nature. That is essentially what Sai King was deriving his inspiration from for Inside View. And Richard Dees, their star reporter, and he goes and shows up at the doorstep of Johnny Smith in the book. This scene was, unfortunately, if I recall correctly, not in the Cronenberg film, but it's been a few years since I've watched it, so if I am mistaken, please give me tons of hell in the comments. But nonetheless, guys, Richard Dees has this brief appearance, most definitely, in the original Dead Zone novel, and he's trying to coerce Johnny Smith to be like a house psychic. You know, that's gonna have like a monthly, weekly column, something like that. But anyway, just be the official psychic correspondent, I guess, for Inside View, of which Johnny Smith immediately is like, that's despicable, and he kicks Richard Dees off his property. And back to what I was mentioning, King was like, yeah, I thought that character, he was there for that, although Inside View has been mentioned countless times as like a little Easter egg in tons of other Stephen King works, both short and full-length novels. But apparently King got this little itch in the late 80s after he was asked to contribute to this particular anthology, the aforementioned Primeval. And so the story started to gestate, and as King has gone on record to say, he's like, the story grew as my impression of Richard Dees grew, and just his backstory, his disillusionment, his alienation from other people based on the sort of schlock that he deals with. And the adaptation is no different. So the adaptation, just to give some proper statistics, it was independently financed by European investors, and Paramount Pictures was big time into wanting to release this film theatrically. However, they wanted to release it in the Halloween of 1998. And so that was unfortunately not going to jive with Mark Pavia, I believe his name is, and so he was the dude who directed this. It was his feature film debut, but he had actually done a bunch of shorts leading back to when he was like 8 years old, and he did like a little 2-minute Dracula short. So this was a dude who was relatively young when he made his feature film debut with this full-length Night Flyer adaptation, but he co-wrote the script, as in Pavia, the director, with his buddy Jack O'Connell, I believe. And so the two of them had been working together for quite a while, and there was a specific project that they did, which was a 40-something minute zombie love story. Yes, we're not talking Warm Bodies, we're talking way before that sort of thing, or even, I guess it could be argued, Return of the Living Dead 3. That's a zombie love story as well. Very underrated. Brian Usna, if I remember correctly. But in any event, so they did this short film called Drag, the aforementioned zombie love story, and they specifically sent it to Richard Rubenstein and to Stephen King, and producer Rubenstein and King were so impressed with it that they're like, okay, we have been discussing wanting to make the Night Flyer since the publication in Nightmares and Dreamscapes of the short story. They had been wanting to adapt it. It's a story that King had a great affinity for. They were trying to find the right person to go behind the camera, develop, and so Pavia and O'Connell, his writing partner, they put the script together. However, King was a consultant and assisted with the story, not with the actual screenplay writing, but he assisted with the story itself, and it was essentially going to be an expansion of that short. And this is something I've said on this program countless times, is that I genuinely believe that the best Sai King adaptations are where you're going with a shorter form and you have the capacity to expand and develop certain things further, as opposed to in his lengthier, like we're talking the paperweight, the doorstopper novels, of which there are many, you know, from Under the Dome to the far higher quality stuff like It and The Stand. But nonetheless, that's where I think Sai King adaptations work so much better, when you can do the expansion aspect as opposed. And this is one of the few instances where I will genuinely contend that I feel that this film is actually an improvement upon the short story, and that is no slight on the short story that also has some connective DNA with Popsy that is both in the audiobook version of it and in the published order of Nightmares and Dreamscapes, like, could this Night Flyer, this vampire who is romping around, you know, the eastern seaboard and chomping down on people in his plane, could it possibly be the same Popsy vampire that we have in the short story of the same name, Popsy, which is a great one. If you haven't listened to the audiobook, the dude who does all of that, boy, his name is eluding me at this point. I should have written it down with all my notes, but he does that, like, the mobsters on The Simpsons. He was also in Thinner, the Richard Bachman adaptation, aka Sai King, as many of you constant readers will know. So he actually narrates the Popsy short story on the audiobook, and he does a great job. So there has been, it's like kind of an unofficial tie-in sort of story. But the Night Flyer short is actually relatively living up to its description as a short story. It's not massive in length like some of those longer form shorts that King has done. And so, prime example for just taking it and really fleshing it out a little bit more so, and director and co-writer Pavia do a great job with this. And so back to the technical aspects of the release and everything, apparently those financial backers were like, nope, that's not going to jive with us. So despite the fact that it had a world debut in Italy theatrically, it ended up getting the rights sent over to HBO. HBO premiered it November 7th, so this month, 25 years ago here in November of 2022, 25 years ago, it made its debut on HBO. And HBO, in my estimation, like, this feels very theatrical, but it also feels very much to me like a really fucking good Tales from the Crypt episode. Tales from the Crypt is my favorite anthology series of all time. That is not to say that every episode is gold, because they most definitely are not, but that's a series that I reviewed in its entirety, including all 3 of the feature films, and in a lot of ways, HBO was the perfect home for this to make its proper debut, at least for North American audiences, because of the fact that it has, like, the occasional little bit of dark humor, but it has that eeriness and that sleaziness to it, most notably because of the fact that you're dealing with the bloodthirsty nature of tabloid journalism, and it explores it very well in its expansion within this. And even more so than that, you have Miguel Ferrer, who appeared in a few episodes of Tales from the Crypt. I think he did maybe 2, if I recall correctly, but one of my favorite genre actors of the 80s and 90s, and it's really kind of a bummer seeing him smoking so heavily throughout this film. I'm not sure if that was in the script or the fact that he was an avid smoker, and he died a number of years ago from throat cancer, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a real bummer, because homie is like putting them down, chainsmithing, and that's still the one vice that Sai King has gone on record countless times to say, he's like, yeah, it's the one thing, I'll still, you know, have a few a week, you know, like, it's the one vice that, you know, Steve has said that he can't completely give up. I mean, for God's sake, he's written so many stories about smoking. I was just revisiting the 10 O'Clock People after I listened to the Night Flyer. I was like, I'm just gonna, as I'm cruising around town and, you know, running errands and doing some stuff like that, some work, I was like, I'm going to just listen to Nightmares and Dreamscapes in its entirety, and the 10 O'Clock People kick so much ass, and that is another one that has kind of a vampiric yet incognito in disguise sort of situation. They've been trying to make that into a feature for so damn long, and I'm sad that they haven't, because the 10 O'Clock People, with its very deep mythology, not to get on too far of a tangent, but with the deep mythology and how much of an infiltration aspect those particular vampires in disguise, the wolves in sheep's clothing, so to speak, that could easily be a feature. That could easily be like a limited series or go on for, you know, a couple seasons or something. 10 O'Clock People, just if you guys haven't checked that out, so damn good. But Miguel Ferrer, man, I mean, he is legendary in my estimation. I mean, lots of people know him from Twin Peaks, but he did RoboCop, he did Deep Star 6. I mean, shit, he was Lloyd in the 94 miniseries of The Stand, and then he also, I believe, was in a smaller role in The Shining, the miniseries that King did in 1997, and he's got tons and tons of other credits. I think he was in Iron Man 3, if I remember correctly, so he did, in fact, do some more mainstream fare before passing away, unfortunately, but he kicks so much ass in this because he plays, like, the aggro, just antagonistic sleazeball, and there's even a few moments in this, and I'm gonna be spoiling this, guys, okay? This is like 25 years, you know, removed. I'm gonna be spoiling things about this film and my affinity for it, but yeah, he plays it very well in the fact that there's certain moments where you feel an essence of empathy from him here and there, only to be dashed away, and you're like, yeah, that's the way this fucker is, like, genuinely at his core. You know, he is just I will step on anyone and everyone to just get my story and nothing else matters. And yet, you know, he's very obviously conflicted, you know, with the smoking and the drinking and this awful alienation and attitude. And I do like the fact that he is a small plane pilot himself, and yet he is trying to track this presumed murderer that thinks he's a vampire. And so he's basically tailing in his own plane, you know, another plane, a Cessna, I'm trying to remember the exact, a Cessna Skymaster. That's another thing, like, for this adaptation, they genuinely had to find an eerie-looking plane, you know, with the blacks and the reds and everything, and I genuinely think that they accomplished that in spades. They really did a damn good job, especially from a cinematographer standpoint, too. So first you had to get the eerie-looking plane that they found from a private plane owner that they used for... So it's funny because the IMDb says that this was filmed in 30 days, and or they had 30 days to film it, and that... what's his name, the director Pavia, actually got it accomplished in 29 days. But then on the DVD, in the supplemental stuff, which this is back in like the earliest days of DVD release. It was released on DVD in, 98, and then there's been a few other versions of it that have come out, including one that I'm disappointed I have yet to see. Because apparently the UK release of this has a few, like 15 or 20 extra seconds of gore, most notably in a scene at the very end where there is like, at one of those small little, you know, podunk airports, there's a massacre of a bunch of people that transpires, and it's fairly bloody, decently gory, but nothing like insane or bonkers. And apparently there are alternate shots that were used that just... The camera hovers like a little longer in some of this graphic stuff, and that's because they weren't 100% if this was going to be a theatrical release or if it was going to go directly to HBO or what the situation would be overseas or whatever. And so for that reason, they did alternate takes of the pretty solid practical that they had, you know, together for this. And I do like the vampire look in this as well. And I also appreciate the fact that they jazzed it in the fact that you get like glimpses and hints, but it's more so like the classic Dracula, you know, with the collar up and everything, but just silhouettes and, you know, shot in the darkness and things of that nature. And even until like the very, very end where you get the final actual reveal of this vampire, which I think is a dope design, you know. I guess the actor, Mark something, I forget his last name, but he was the one who actually played both when you see the like human version of this vampire, this very amusingly Dwight Renfield, I believe is the name. And Dwight is funny because Dwight is the name of an actor who was in an earlier Dracula adaptation, and then Renfield, you know, is like the little like, I guess, familiar, if I am going to use what we do in the Shadows terminology. I guess Igor's not the proper term, but in any event, so those are cool little nods by King there. But I dig the design that we get from, you know, Renfield once we finally see him. And so the actor who you see in just like a couple of shots, you know, in his human form, he was under like prosthetics and like moving robotic mouth stuff, and so he had actually said that it was incredibly difficult doing a lot of those scenes with all of that stuff on him. So it really, being a theater actor, it tested him. But I really dig the look of the vampire. Miguel Ferrer's performance is awesome in this, and he has great interplay with the character that was new and specific to the adaptation, and that is the character of Catherine. And so Catherine is essentially a Jimmy Olsen, as Richard Dees calls her a number of times in this, and she is basically taking over for this woman Dottie, who is a reporter with the Inside View, who apparently went nuts and put a plastic bag over her head and killed herself in the bathtub. So that's another example that we get in both the short story and in the feature adaptation of the fact that reporting this sort of crazy shizzle takes its toll, and it messes with somebody's mind. And that's where the credo of Richard Dees in both the book and in the adaptation really rings true in my estimation, where he says, never believe what you publish and never publish what you believe. So that shows his cynicism, his jadedness, but it also shows that he is not really letting it get to him that much. You know, he's cognizant of it to a degree, and that's why he's a little more impervious in comparison with somebody like Dottie. But the Catherine character, new and specific to the film, I think has great interplay with Dees, and the fact that she's initially trying to just pick his brain and almost like looks up to him, and then it turns into this sort of competition aspect, and then later on start working together, because Morrison, the guy who is something Graham, I forget his name, but he was on a bunch of television stuff, and he plays, you can tell he's hamming it up and he's having fun. He's presumably the editor slash publisher, whatever. He's the guy in charge, and so he essentially pits Dees and Catherine against each other, both working on this same story of trying to track down this serial killer, this night flyer. And so, yeah, Dees thinks that he is covering the story, and then, of course, Catherine is working on it separately. Their paths intertwine at the same motel, and that's where they start working together, only for Dees to show his true colors and be like, oh, fuck you, you know, I'm just gonna totally screw you over and take this story back for myself. So there is kind of a interesting mystery aspect to it as well. Lots of crime scene investigation stuff. We get some morgue stuff. We get some cemetery stuff. And all throughout, we see just how much of a slimer Richard Dees is. The fact that, you know, he's at the autopsy stuff, he's at the morgue looking at the corpse that was autopsied at the very beginning of the film, which has a great title, a great line that after we see the, you know, the title credit and everything, that there is the initial landing of the night flyer, and this guy who is like the air traffic controlman or whatever, the guy who was working the board and, you know, the call and stuff, he's like, why do all the weird ones have to fly at night? And that sets the precedent, and we see like a pretty cool like scrape on the face, but once again, it's the Jaws scenario and the fact that we see the carnage, and we also see just the lingering effect, or we get a recanting of the lingering effect, the glamoring, so to speak, that this Dwight Renfield, this night flyer, is able to orchestrate within the victims before, and also, you know, those who maybe he spared for whatever reason. So they're almost like, not so much zombie-like, but they're like in a bit of a trance, you know, they're under his power, under his control. And yeah, like it's almost like the seeds are planted, and then it's like the 40-year-old version bit where he's like, then you come back and you fuck the plant, man. Yeah, so the Renfield character presumably has a initial interaction, and that's because, yeah, he's got to sleep during the day. He has to have some sort of protection, and so he will glamour, and then in turn he will eventually take down the victims that he is basically using for their assistance. There is a couple at one particular point where the woman is super glamour, and she goes and gets her hair done, and her husband's like, the hell is wrong with you, and so on and so forth. Husband gets killed, and in a much more brutal manner. It's a cool decapitation in the aftermath that we get. And then she is just peacefully found, drained of all her blood, sitting on the bed. It's really similar in vibe to the February bit of Cycle of the Werewolf, which is where the woman, it's the Valentine's Day sort of thing, and she senses the werewolf is going to come in and take her, so to speak. And yeah, Silver Bullet was the adaptation of Cycle of the Werewolf. Underrated, not great, but the transformation scene in the church is terrific. But I got a similar vibe as far as this woman being so smitten with this otherworldly creature and just giving herself to it. And that's the vibe that we get. And there's a really cool interspersing scene where the officers who were first on the crime scene are recanting its discovery to Richard Dees, and the edit intersperses him breaking into the trailer and searching through the crime scene and just investigating things, and it's interspersed with a voiceover from the law enforcement guys that discovered it. I thought that was cool. That's where we do see the pretty solid looking decapitation. The gore is good in this. It's not super, super prevalent. It's really more so just the vibe of eeriness and impending dread as, you know, Dees is on the trail and he gets closer and closer, and then of course, you know, the well kind of dries up a little bit, he gets a little frustrated, and that is when he teams up with Catherine, the girl who he's kind of competing with and everything. So, I mean, really solid in that regard, I have to say, and I dig where it ends up going with and even the acting from some of the bit players. Like, we get this gas station attendant in Maryland, we also get a reference to dairy, and there's lots of Easter eggs in this. I'll get to that in a second, but we get a reference to the fact that the plane originated in Derry, is said in the script, and so he, being Dees, goes and interviews, you know, this old gin head, and he's like, you know, trying to get information from him, and you know, the main accent terrifically done by that particular character actor. Great job by the kid at the gas station in Maryland as well. So despite the fact that this is really the Miguel Ferrer show in just about every way possible, Catherine, the actress, who doesn't, her name is Julie Entwistle, this was her feature debut after a bunch of work on like theater and stage and stuff like that, but it's a bummer that she didn't go on to really do much of anything else as far as filmmaking goes. She had a very small role in the Kevin Kline movie In and Out, but beyond that, nothing. And it's a real shame because she's pretty damn good in this, and she is not one of those like damsel in distress or whatever. She holds her own, and the fact that she's a tough woman and she stands up to Richard Dees in a number of scenes, and I also appreciate the fact that they didn't try to turn this into some sort of love story, or at least like hookup thing between the two of them. I feel like it really would have soiled the dynamic between the two of them if this had turned, like, even if Dees still screwed her over, like, if he had also, like, screwed her as well, I feel like I'm so glad that they didn't, in the screenplay process of expanding this, take it in that direction, because that would have been lame, that would have been cliched and expected, and I'm really glad that they did not take that particular approach. Yeah, vampire flying in from Derry, just, and I dig, once again, I dig the somber, eerie tone of that, and it's in the way that this is shot. There is, some may not like the fact that there's a few scenes that veer into black and white. It's normally like dream sequences, and then there is a big showdown scene at the end that I'll get to in like the full-on spoiler of how this actually ends, but I dug that stuff. And also back to the director, Mark Pavia, there were a lot of people that were greatly impressed with this first-time feature director on set because of the fact that he storyboarded every single scene. And he said in an interview that the reason he did that was because he wanted to take the approach of almost like arranging music, and the fact that you're like, okay, there's going to be a swell here, there's going to be an abrasive, like, in-your-face bit there, and then there's going to be, like, the peaks and valleys, you know, the calm before the storm, and the ebb and flow, and the back and forth. And there were a lot of people on set that were very impressed that this young kid showed up this prepared, and so that gained him some credibility, which is cool. And so, yeah, another thing that really maintains that eeriness is the fact that you have Brian Keene scoring it, and Brian Keene has actually won multiple Emmy Awards, and he was also nominated for numerous Academy Awards, actually, primarily in the documentary side of filmmaking. But nonetheless, he maintains with this very light, eerie, sort of minimalistic piano score through a lot of it. He maintains the eerie vibe that I really think the film is going for throughout. Now, granted, you have some of those hammy and cheesier moments, and the dark comedy, more so than anything, is evidenced in some of the Easter eggs and just the way that they present Inside View, most notably earlier in the film, before it ramps up and gets a lot more serious in the second and the third act. But just the discussion between Catherine and Morrison early in the film, where he's like, I want a tax on the handicapped, I want alien abductions, I want, you know, breast surgery horror stories, I want dead baby photos, just all this different stuff. It really, excuse me, it exemplifies the particular brand of filth that Inside View specializes in and caters to their sick and twisted audience with. And in one particular scene, you get the most amount of Easter eggs, and that's where I want to consult the IMDb in the trivia section, because I thought this was really funny, because I noticed a couple of these in the background where they show all of these different bylines that Richard Dees has written, and they're all references to different Cy King stories. So you've got Spring Hill Jack strikes again, Strawberry Spring, obviously. Headless Lem Mays leads to successful birth. Excuse me, I am getting over a little bit of sickness from the weekend, unfortunately. And that's a nod to the breathing method from different seasons about the woman who gets her head cut off and yet continues contractions and birthing the child. So I thought that was fun. Kitty cultists in Kansas worship creepy voodoo god, Children of the Corn. Obviously, satanic shopkeeper sells gory goodies, needful things. Naked demons leveled my lawn. Yeah, these headlines are just so spot on to the sort of craziness that I saw in that weekly World News black and white paper. And maybe the black and white is also a nod to the fact that that was a publication that in its heyday was never put together in color. But yeah, that last one being The Lawnmower Man, and then The Ultimate Killer Diet, Gypsy Curse Flays Fat Lawyer's Flesh, that's Bachman's Thinner, which is great. And then there's also another bit where Miguel Ferrer's Dees he's telling Catherine about a story of a bunch of presumably murderous kids that this school teacher, well, it says she burns up and that she kills them in a different way in the short story, which is Suffer the Little Children, one of the earliest Stephen King short stories that was collected also in Nightmares and Dreamscapes, if I recall correctly, the same as this. So, yeah, man, I dig this movie quite a bit. I genuinely do. Is it one of his greatest adaptations? No, but it most definitely deserves to be in that discussion of most underrated and overlooked. I really wish that I had a region-free player so that I could track down a copy, but even this North American release for, what, Region A, I believe it is? Seriously, this sells for like 50 bucks online. I was able to obtained it a number of years ago on eBay for, I think, like 15 or 20 bucks, so I did get a decent deal on it at the time. But yeah, these long out-of-print DVDs, man, especially in the King capacity, like I know the Stand one from the miniseries is really tough to track down. There's a number of others, and so this is one that, in my estimation, is just crying out for, you know, whether it's, you know, Scream Factory being, you know, Shout Factory, or whether it's Arrow or whoever, we need a deluxe edition of the Night Flyer. We totally friggin' do, because and I would love to see some, you know, because it's only like just text interviews and stuff in this original DVD. I want like actual sit-down discussions with Mark Pavia, who I think he's probably almost as well known for Fender Bender from 2016. That yeah, he has shifted more into like EP and producer sort of roles and stuff like that. But yeah, he's still active in the industry, but his most prolific stuff being Fender Bender and then Night Flyer. So, I don't know, I want to see a whole just myriad of supplemental material for this film because I am indeed a big fan of it. So I mentioned the interspersing of the crime scene, I mentioned I like the aftermath decapitation that we see in the trailer with the couple getting killed, but it really, after Dees screws over Catherine's character when he figures out that there is something amiss at this particular smaller airport that he claims to be the FAA, and he's like, yeah, I'm looking for this particular Cessna, so on and so forth. He gives the call numbers for it and everything, and he gets a one-word response of, have you seen this, sir? Sir, have you seen this? No. And then the call is just immediately ended. So that is a big indication that, okay, I need to get there with the friggin' quickness because some crazy hell is probably about to go down. And sure enough, it does when Dees tries calling as he's getting ready to land at this particular airstrip. He hears just a whole bevy of screaming, like just a cacophony of crazy killing going down, and just completely accurate to the short story, there's just a bunch of people. It's like, as opposed to taking one, maybe two or whatever at a time, it's like Renfield went nutsoid and just feeding frenzy status. And so Dees shows up at the airport and he's looking around and he sees just the carnage everywhere. There's like probably like a couple dozen dead bodies, you know, the ticket checkers, you know, a bunch of, you know, flyers and stuff. Like they're all just scattered all throughout this, you know, kind of lobby sort of check-in area. And he slips and falls and he's like covered in blood and he's all grossed out. And so he runs into the bathroom, and this is one of my absolute favorite scenes, and it's done so well in this, just as eerie as it's described in the short story, where he's in this bathroom, he's trying to like wash up and like regain his composure. And he sees through the mirror. So Dees is looking through the mirror, and behind him he sees blood like spraying into the urinal. And obviously, since he's looking through a mirror, he can't see Renfield because Renfield is still friggin' there. And they do it incredibly convincingly. You know, it's just, all you see is just invisible blood being pissed out by this vampire in the urinal. They do a great camera trick with making it believable, and then, once again, you still don't even see Renfield, like, immediately in this particular scene, where he walks up to Dees and he says something really intriguing to him. He's like, your appetite for blood intrigues me. We have a lot in common, you and I. And then he describes them as being brothers in blood because of the fact that Dees is so hungry for a story and so just degaff about, and so just cold to what he's covering. I mean, he has Morrison, you know, the head at Inside View, basically saying, okay, that photo, you went too far with the photos of that, you know, dead child or baby or whatever the heck it was. And so, yeah, the guy is just, he feels nothing. And that's probably why Renfield, well, not probably, it's obviously why Renfield allows him to live. Although he does give him the stipulation, he's like, nah, man, you need to destroy the film of all of these, you know, things that you have photographed, and if you continue pursuing me, I will kill you, like, straight up. And the only reason that I am sparing you is because of the fact that, you know, I'm just kind of fascinated and probably amused by the fact that you are so bloodthirsty and we share that similarity. So that's the thing. And this is where it diverts a little bit to, in my estimation, an improvement on the ending, but that's where it's presumably debatable amongst people, because of the fact that in the original short story, you basically have Renfield dip out and Miguel Ferrer's character of Dees is framed for the murder, because a bunch of law enforcement shows up, and the law enforcement sees him in the midst of this massacre. And so for that reason, they're just like, okay, you're obviously the one who did it. And the short story ends with him just being taken into custody, and boom, that's it. Renfield escapes. You know, Richard Dees is framed for it. End of story. This goes a little bit different, and I kind of appreciate the difference, because Renfield goes to leave, and that's where Dees is like, yo, I have to see you, I have to see you. And so that's where we finally, at the end of the film, get the full reveal of this really dope vampire design. These long protruding teeth and this, like, gaping elongated mouth, and it looks really rad, and that's where the animatronic, like, you know, movement of the mouth and everything comes into play, you know, with the prosthetics and, you know, the robotic design and everything. And yeah, maybe it's a little bit dated by today's standards, but this is again where I make the Tales from the Crypt comparison about how much I dig this one. And so it works for me, and I really dig the design, and I love the fact that we do flash into his actual just human look as well, when he's not gone into the whole, you know, Buffy from Dusk Till Dawn, where you see vampires in their true form with, like, the, you know, the protruding foreheads and, you know, the mouth being a little bit longer and, you know, the extension of the teeth and all that different stuff. But Renfield, after he reveals himself to Dees, he slashes his wrist and he makes him drink his blood. Now, I'm not sure what sort of mythology they were going for here, because at least dating back to the Bram Stoker stuff, like, yeah, if you drink the blood of said vampire, you will turn, but you also have to be bitten as well. So it's like it's a two-way street sort of situation. Maybe the mythology here is different, but it doesn't really matter in this particular case, because right after drinking the blood, that's where Miguel's character of Dees has this freak out, and we shift into the black and white, and he envisions all of those corpses that he discovers when he first arrives at this small airport, all rising up in the black and white and coming towards him. And he takes an axe and he just starts chomping and everything, and that's when the law enforcement shows up, just like in the short story. And when he comes to, that's when the cops are there, weapons are drawn, they're ready to take him down, and he kind of takes a run at him, and of course he gets shot the fuck up, and he gets killed. And at that same moment, Catherine, hot on the trail, shows up, and this is where I dig the catharsis of this ending, in the fact that the Dees character becomes a story himself, because since he gets killed by the cops, Catherine is like, well, you know what? You screwed me over, homie, so check it out. I am going to steal this, and I'm going to turn this into my own story, ha-ha! And that's what she does. And so the film ends with just taking a peek at none other than the cover story by Miss Catherine, and it's, the irony of the Night Flyer is defanged, and she essentially pins it on him, says that he was the Night Flyer, and yeah, continue onward. And so this presumably launches her career, and just, yeah, Night Flyer continues to drain another day. And this is something that I discovered upon my research that I was completely unaware of. Apparently, in the mid-2000s, Stephen King and Mark Pavia, the director, co-wrote a sequel. Yeah, they co-wrote a script for a sequel, and yeah, the working title was Fear of Flying, and Fear of Flying was going to follow the Catherine character, the ascension of her career, and also was going to explore some of the origins of this Dwight Renfield, or at least the name that he's going by, but the origins of the Night Flyer. I would have loved to have seen this. I would have loved to have seen Julia Entwistle come back and reprise her role, especially since she obviously, you know, was pretty much a one and done in Hollywood with this role, and she's great in it. So that's another thing where I would have loved to have seen this. Maybe in a fan fiction form of some sort, this could be revisited, because this is another King story that leaves it very much up in the air for a sequel with the way things are ended, at least in the feature film. Once again, the Catherine character is not in the short story, but I feel like for someone that Dees can play off of and compete with, her addition was really awesome, and I would have loved to have seen that movie. Unfortunately, this movie was a flop. It did decent numbers and gained the cult following based on the HBO broadcast and then also once it was released on DVD. But it was eventually acquired by New Line Cinema in early '98 and released in theaters in February of that year, where it barely broke $125,000. Yeah, and that was on a budget that was estimated to be well over $1 million. They filmed the whole thing in North Carolina, Wilmington, I believe, if I remember correct. So yeah, shot it there in the South, but the issue really with finding funding was the fact that it was a minor cult hit. So it found its audience eventually, obviously, and I mean, peeps like me who have such like big affinity and appreciation for it. However, King was apparently trying to get like $10 million together for this film, and so despite only being like 8, maybe 10 years removed, whatever the hell it was, the fact that he wanted 10 times the budget of the original for something that, you know, was not even a hit released theatrically, lost the studio money. Well, I mean, independent investors lost them money. So it's not like, you know, Paramount, who was initially, you know, tapped to release it, lost money, or I would imagine New Line did with, you know, putting it out in theaters and it making such a meager amount. So bummer though, because that is most def a story that I would have loved to have read and seen, you know, come into play. If there was only some way I could track down that script, I would friggin' love to read it. My homie Matty Jorson, who's been a longtime supporter of the channel and has sent me all kinds of crazy King scripts. Hey man, if you're watching this, can you track down that script? Because he's far more connected with being able to obtain things like that in comparison with me. But yeah, at the end of the day, man, I am a big fan of The Night Flyer. While not like the best King adaptation or anything, it is most definitely one that I hold in pretty high regard and that I most definitely dig the hell out of. So yeah, this is a more longer-winded video than I was anticipating, but I really wanted to gush about this and I had a lot to say. And so yes, very exciting, and I extend a grande gracias for anybody who was tuning in to my thoughts, spoilery, about The Night Flyer. Great King adaptation, one that I am a big fan of. The next Anniversary King adaptation that I will be going through is none other than Schwarzenegger, the Running Man. So I believe this will be like maybe 2 or 3 weeks from this filming, because this is actually celebrating its 35th anniversary, whereas Night Flyer is a very faithful adaptation. The Running Man is not, but as I all too often say, it's a different level of the tower, you know, it's a different turn of the wheel, and for being a action vehicle in the 80s from Arnie One Man Army, I'm a big fan of The Running Man, even though, you know, the Ben Richards in that particular story, the source material being the Bachman book and everything, drastically different. I'm actually re-listening to that now too, even though I already did a anniversary review of that particular book recently. But yeah, so look forward to that in the coming weeks. And also, just a reminder, you see it right back there on the shelf? Yeah. From A Buick 8 is the November book of the month. I announced it during our live stream last week of the 2 Bachman books, Rage and Blaze. So that was when I dropped that knowledge about that. And then also, if you're less inclined to check out From A Buick 8 and you want a little bit more reading time, I heads up that Different Seasons is going to be the December book of the month. I know everybody's often busy with holiday stuff, family, friends, get-togethers, whatever it may be. So that's why I wanted to make certain to announce both of those at the same time. So at the beginning of December, the Tuesday Book of the Month live stream will be From A Buick 8. It'll be my first time revisiting that in a while. And then Different Seasons will be at the beginning of January, discussing those 4 novellas, including probably 2, if not 3, in my estimation, of his most popular adaptations in Apt Pupil, The Body, which was turned into Stand By Me, and then Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption, which is probably the most respected and revered Cy King adaptation in the Frank Darabont, The Green, excuse me, well, I think he also did The Green Mile, but yeah, The Shawshank Redemption. So, looking forward to all of that, and to just more Hail to Stephen King coverage coming in the weeks, the months, in the new year. I am still going to be doing a little bit of deviation into other authors here and there, most notably a return of my Stephen King recommended horror. I have it down to 2 different names, but I'm not going to be revealing that until near the end of 2022 in preparation for, you know, 23 and some of the new bits of coverage that we're going to be doing. I will also be making a return at some point in the near future to Bakker at the Moon. Ha ha ha! and that's going to be with the Damnation game. I started it, but then I got sidetracked with the Sandman Volume 3 audio drama, which is the shit. All three of those are so good. The voice cast is exceptional and everything. But yeah, so myself and my coverage here on the horror show, as Cecil is most notably going to be quite busy with the Dylan's New Nightmare stuff in the next few weeks and months, eyeing a late spring, early summer release from what I understand. He's got some great peeps behind the scenes that are being assembled for the post-production process, editing, score, all that. So definitely keep your tabs on that. I'm going to make sure to put a link here in the description video to the IndieGogo, which is getting finishing funds together. If you want to have your name in the credits, definitely check that out. If you would like to support Cecil and this awesome looking fan film being Dylan's New Nightmare. And also, I'm going to list in the description below a link here on YouTube to where if you want to watch the Night Flyer in its entirety and you're having a fuck of a time trying to track down the DVD, whichever version, the UK version with that little extra sprinkling of gore, or the North American Region A one, it's on YouTube. And yeah, I'll make sure that anybody who is inclined can check that out and just kind of grade my enthusiasm about this particular adaptation. I have been Jaime and Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube. I must admit, where it's all musky and everything right now, Twitter is where I spend the predominance of my time. If I was a betting man, well, why am I saying if? Because I am a sports betting man from time to time. But if I was more of an avid betting man on anything beyond that, I would most definitely say that the reports of Twitter's death are very unfounded, to paraphrase that famous quote or whatever. But yeah, I spend the predominance of my time there, not as far as trolling interactions or anything like that, but I do love the streamlined format of being able to search my bloody disgustings and, you know, Collider and whatever it may be for my entertainment and most specifically horror-centric news. That's where I scroll. I put stuff on Instagram and Facebook a little bit. Facebook is the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group, though, if you would like to get involved there. Over 1,000 strong, a nicely knit Ka-Tet, lots of great peeps there, lots of good palaver, and I have been less active there, but that is because of a big just life development that is happening with me that I'm going to be revealing sometime here in the very near future that I am excited about, and it entails a return to education for me and just that enhancement and enlightenment that I'm very much looking forward to. So that's going to be the end of these lengthier proceedings for Hail to Stephen King this week. I am a little bit on the mend, but I'm getting close, and very much looking forward to next week and getting to discuss Pennywise, the story of it, for its home release. And I'm also going to be talking about the Unearthed Pet Cemetery documentary that was done by the same team, John and his buddy. So yes, look forward to that. And yeah, I guess until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, enemigos, constant readers and viewers alike, say thank you. I'm hopeful we have been well met. We share more of this palaver sooner rather than later. And until then, remember to stay scared. And in this case, yeah, watch Stephen King. Check out the link in the description box below. He was originally supposed to be a mortician and cameo in this, apparently, but due to a book tour, he was unable to. And also, obviously, read Stephen King. The short story that was the genesis for this great film is housed in Nightmares and Dreamscapes.